Our first speaker is Jennifer Howard. Jennifer is Director of Land Protection at the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, overseeing DCR's land acquisition and conservation restriction stewardship programs. Over the last 30 years at DCR, she has managed a wide variety of land protection and greenway projects across Massachusetts and was DCR's project lead on the Bear Hole Conservation Partnership. Our next speaker is Mark Noonan, West Springfield Natural Resource Planner, who has been the staff on the Conservation Commission since 2009. In that role, he secured grant and CPA funding for land protection and park recreation projects. Mark became interested in conservation finance while serving in the Peace Corps in Uganda's Kaibal National Park. By developing community-based ecotourism projects, he helped foster community support for the park and surrounding natural resources. After returning to the United States, he worked in Westfield as city planner and conservation agent before forming the Winding River Land Conservancy with Westfield Mayor Richard K. Sullivan Jr. Working in land protection confirmed the important need for funding for conservation projects, which led him to explore the idea of selling carbon credits for West Springfield's Bear Hole Reservoir with West Springfield's Mayor Edward Sullivan. The investigation resulted in the Tri-City Improved Forest Management Project, which has successfully registered and sold carbon offsets. Our final presenter today is Bob Wilber, who has been the Director of Land Conservation for Mass Audubon since 2000. Previously, he worked in similar capacities for the Massachusetts chapter of the Nature Conservancy and Massachusetts State Forest and Parks. Bob is a past president of the Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition and currently serves on MLTC's Board of Trustees. He lives in Stowe, where he is president of the all-volunteer Stowe Conservation Trust and a member of the Town of Stowe's Open Space Committee. During his 35-plus year career, Bob has been directly involved in the protection of more than 40,000 acres of Massachusetts. Now I'd like to turn it over to our presenters today, and thank you. Bob, you should be able to share your slides now.
Great. Thank you, Jess. And let me and then can you all see that?
Yes.
All right. Like to see that thumbs up, Jess. That's great. And good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday morning to you. Looks like the weather can't quite make up its mind what it wants to do. It was perfectly clear around 7 a.m. Then it got really cloudy here. Anyway, I'm in Stowe, Mass. But nice to be with you this morning, and love to talk about this project too. This, I dare say, this was kind of a labor of love for all of us who worked on this, and you know, such tremendous partners, Jennifer and Mark, and their colleagues, and so our goal is to share the story of how that happened and try to extract some of the lessons learned for all of you. So amazing property. In many ways, it's one of those properties that in some ways really shouldn't be there anymore. And that's because, you know, it was, as Jess mentioned in the description of the workshop, it was originally acquired. There's these 1,400 acres of land. It was assembled over time, a lot of it about a century ago, for water supply purposes. And when that use ended, the property did become quite vulnerable. And that's really what motivated the idea of putting some permanent protections on the property. So let's jump right into it. But I hope we can have some fun with this and have it be really helpful to the audience. And so if you have a question as we're going through, put it in the chat. Jess will flag that, and And then we will leave time at the end, as she said, for questions and answers. So just to get everybody oriented, this may not be necessary, but just so we understand, we're on the west side of the Connecticut River in the southern Connecticut River Valley. Westfield on the other side of the river from Springfield. And the Bear Hole property is a real jewel. It's loaded with biodiversity. It's a place that is well used by people in terms of different recreation activities, and just a very special place. And it has an interesting history also that Mark will tell us about in just a few minutes. So with this richness, the special place, especially one that was benefiting so many people, the idea that that property could be expendable because it's no longer used for the purpose for which it was acquired was a real concern and really motivated all of us. And yes, it even does have bears, and this bear taking a nap in the large white pine. Had to throw that one in there. I couldn't resist. And so, as I said, when we realized that this property was vulnerable and that at some point, actually, let me be even more direct, especially with in this setting. In Massachusetts, when casino gambling was legalized, my biggest fear was that I was going to wake up some morning and hear on NPR that the Bear Hole property had been sold to some giant casino developer to build a mega resort. The dollars would have been extraordinary, would have been very difficult for the community to say no to. And so we wanted to put some additional permanent protections on this land to take that possibility off the table forever. And that was very much the motivation. So with Mass Audubon and DCR and Town of West Springfield working together to make that happen. So let's hear from the different players in terms of sort of what brought them to this site, what intrigued them, what interested them, what motivated them to stay with it over the multi-year effort. And so first up is Jennifer and DCR.
Hi. We have a nice small group. I feel in some ways we should have just scheduled a hike to the property and talked about it on taking a hike, because out here I'm in East Hampton, Western Mass, and it is still sunny here. But hi everybody, nice to see you, and thanks for tuning in on at least here, a sunny Saturday morning. Thanks, Bob. And so I think what we're going to do now is talk a little bit about what brought each of us to the table, and then move into sort of how we did it, and then what challenges we had along the way. It was a long haul effort. I think Mass Audubon and West Springfield were working on it for a while. DCR engaged a little bit in the earlier 2000 teens. And then over the last couple of years, we really worked hard with 3 partners together and finally finished the project last spring, last June. But so I think, I'm looking at who's in the room. I think everyone pretty much knows us and what we do. But DCR, as you all know, we own and manage a large system of forests and parks, and we buy land and conservation restrictions across the state to add to these places, and really provide people with the opportunity to enjoy the special places that we own and manage. There were a number of reasons why DCR was interested in Bear Hole. Bob mentioned a couple of them, but the first one that I'll touch on is really the ecological significance. And in this slide, you can see some of the wildlife and resources that you might find at Bear Hole. And the map in the center actually shows the extent of the Bear Hole landscape. If you can go to the next slide, Bob. please. So this just zooms in a little and shows some of the resource layers. I think if I'm seeing the participants, I'm sure all of you are pretty familiar with what you're looking at, but the property has a wide variety of natural and cultural resource values. Mark will talk a little bit about the cultural resources in a bit. But it's habitat for rare and common plant and wildlife species. There are a number of vernal pools, as you can see on the map, little blue stars are certified vernal pools. There are beaver ponds, a heron rookery, and large swaths of really healthy forests and really intact forests in all, which are storing and sequestering carbon, all in really close proximity to an incredibly dense area, which is pretty incredible, which is one of the reasons we put this map up. Actually, two reasons. One is to show just how much development surrounds Bear Hole, but also, the overlay map, which those of us who do land conservation often use, which shows the concentration of important resources in this location, in the context of a really suburban and developed landscape. And so you can go into Bear Hole and walk around and feel like you're kind of in the wilderness and you're like 10 minutes from the Holyoke Mall, which is really quite unbelievable. But the other reason is the concentration of resources is also what brought us to the table, because that is one of the ways that DCR helps focuses and targets property for land protection, is places where a number of different values overlay. Next slide, Bob. So also, the Bear Hole Reservoir, for anyone who's been there, is really an amazing recreational asset. And there's a large hiking network for the folks in the area, the people in the town, heavily used by the people in town and the region. And it's really a great place for people from the community and area to hike and bike and really enjoy the outdoors. A large stretch of the New England Scenic Trail. The New England Trail, which is the nationally designated scenic trail, goes along the eastern edge of the property and is now permanently protected for everyone to enjoy. I should also mention that the Bear Hole, you notice from the map, and I think folks are on the line in this room are familiar. Bear Hole is sort of the southern end of the Holyoke Range, and DCR has focused on protecting the Holyoke Range for decades. We've been acquiring and protecting land along the range of Mount Tom since I worked at then DEM, since Bob worked at DEM actually back in the day, and Bear Hole is really the southern anchor to that large area that has been identified by Biomap and the Nature Conservancy in their resilience, the climate resilience data, and by a number of people as a really important resource in the state. And the Bear Hole landscape is the largest unprotected, or was the largest unprotected property from West Springfield all the way up to the Holyoke Range. And we were just really grateful and excited to have the opportunity to help conserve it. And then I'll just add one more comment is, I think more and more all of us are focused on, our land protection efforts are focused on protecting lands that are resilient to climate change. And as you saw from that map, the Bear Hole landscape is really an oasis, like almost a completely forested oasis in an otherwise developed landscape that really is beneficial. Its protection is beneficial to wildlife, to people. It stores and sequesters carbon, and really and is really important for flood storage and a whole variety of other reasons. So those are just some of the highlights about what brought us to the table to work with West Springfield and Mass Audubon to help conserve it.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yep, back to you, Bob.
Great, thank you. And so just again, with the audience here, I think most of you know Mass Audubon. And so I'll keep that description very brief. We're strictly Massachusetts. We're actually the first Audubon conservation organization formed in the world at the time, 1896. In Boston by two very heroic women who started the organization. Two things just to clarify, common misconceptions. One I just did, I guess, which is we are not part of National Audubon, not that there'd be anything wrong with that, but we're an independent organization formed well in advance of National Audubon. We are also not focused just on birds. That's the other misconception. We're really focused on protecting nature, and especially with the backdrop of climate change, that's the aperture of activity that really makes sense. And then the other part of it is providing opportunities for people to experience nature firsthand. So great partnering with Jennifer and DCR. There's a lot of overlap between our missions. They're obviously a state agency. We are a private organization, but we really have a lot of common ground on protecting important habitats and nature, and also places that people can use and benefit from. And certainly Bear Hole fits that. So this map here shows the 12 or so largest intact forested landscapes in Massachusetts. This is a little bit of a dated map, but I put it in here because it really helps underscore the importance of Bear Hole in the landscape context of it. So we're going to be looking at that particular forest block there, and that's the Holyoke Range Mount Tom block. And as Jennifer said, DCR has worked for many decades to conserve the Holyoke Range. One of my favorite places is to go to Skinner State Park and just stand there for a while and just enjoy it. It's a really special place. So we're going to, if you look at the shape of that block of protected land, zoom in a bit, you can see how much of it is connected and protected already, with Bear Hole being on the southern terminus of it. One of the largest at that time unprotected or not fully protected properties in that corridor. These large connected conserved corridors are already playing a really key role in climate response, giving plants and animals opportunities to shift around and find a more comfortable location as climate conditions change. And so the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to jump in a virtual helicopter, if you will, and we're going to take a quick tour from Bear Hole up this corridor of connected, protected landscape. So we're in our plane. We've taken our Dramamine, and we're starting to move up the Connecticut River Valley. We are over Bear Hole at this point. We're just about to leave Bear Hole, up over the Holyoke reservoirs, coming up soon over Mount Tom. And one thing that's really interesting is you look at this, you can really appreciate the land use and how intact this corridor is as a forested landscape. The other real attraction for Mass Audubon and DCR, as Jennifer alluded to, is in proximity to people. And I love your comment, Jennifer, that this place is 10 minutes from the Holyoke Mall. That really puts it in perfect perspective. It is a wilderness, a very large, wild area thriving with wildlife, and yet it is located within 5 miles of 3 gateway cities. And the other factoid, if I remember correctly, within 10 miles of this property, there are 500,000 people. And that's a pretty powerful thing. Carbon storage is one of the real benefits from this property, the amazingly valuable services that this property provides, carbon storage being only one of them. But it's an important one, and other benefits that this large intact forested landscape provides is cooling for the southern Connecticut River Valley. And that's a particularly important service and will become only more so over time. And so now I'll hand to Mark Noonan.
Thank you, Bob and Jennifer and the audience for being with us on this beautiful day. It's actually beautiful here in West Springfield still. Jennifer mentioned the Mount Holyoke Range, which this area is very similar to in the volcanic rock that's formed many, many eons ago. And it is what ends up the soils in the rock and the formations that make how people use it and how and what plants use it and what wildlife uses it. About 15,000 years ago, the glaciers drained or receded, and then Lake Hitchcock, as we all know about, formed and then drained. And then about 900 years ago, we've got the native peoples using the landscape for planting some crops and mostly hunter gathering. About 1636, the Europeans show up in Springfield and establish a settlement and start to change the landscape to their liking. By 1650s, we're settling the Pawcatuck Valley, which is what feeds the Bear Hole Reservoir. And there are mills constructed on that brook, and it's a fairly intensively used property. And I think that's the amazing thing for me, is that it's gone from sort of a industrial, commercial, agrarian area to a reservoir, and then to we don't know what in the future, a long-term protected conservation area that will serve over 500,000 people that live in the area. Do you have the slide there, the next slide there? So one of the things that they found a spring there, and water was so bad in Springfield to the point where they had a typhoid breakout from water coming from the Ludlow Reservoir in Ingersoll Grove. So one of the entrepreneurs that started this resort started selling water from here and bringing it to Springfield to the Massasoit House. That's why it's called Massasoit Spring, which was on Main Street in Springfield. And so this is the Spring House. They had baptisms there and quite a bit of stuff going on. To go back to sort of Bob's idea, worry about it being a casino early in the 1800s, late 1890s, it was being used almost for that purpose. There's a talk about it being used by men-only clam bakes where there are counterfeiters and ruffians gambling. So, but about 19, so this is the Bear Cage, and it's not the name of Bear Hole doesn't come from this, even though that's the common belief. Actually, in 1870s, we have an article where the first reference I can see in writing of it being Bear Hole. This bear actually came from the Adirondacks, and it was captured in a trap by the people that manufactured tires in Chicopee. And they used to have a hunting lodge up in the Grass River, and they brought it down and gave it to their friend who owned the Massasoit House. And that's why it had the people come. So the bear dies about in 1903, finally. There's a lot of good stories about the bear. Anyway, so about 1906, this is the chimney. The resort was out over the waterway, so you could look at the waterfall. It was an open area thing, not like the top of Mount Tom you can see here in the pictures. Not a hotel, but more of an escape, plein air, out in the woods sort of thing. So town buys the property in 1906 with the approval of the State Board of Health and tears down things, drains all the swamps, it starts filling up, it builds a dam, it starts filling up the reservoir, which is still here today. There's, again, a lot of conflict with the uses on the property. We've had piggeries that people were in court because their pigs were using the water supply. By 1917, we're expanding and we're buying more land to protect, the idea is to protect the bigger watershed. And they converted the pumps to electricity by 1913. And then they start taking this land and trying to turn it into this artificial forest by planting plantations between the 20s and the 40s. But water is always an issue in West Springfield. So they find that this supply even isn't enough. And they start looking for water in Southwick. And by 1949, there's a water line running from Southwick. And that's important to this story because it is what starts the end, the beginnings of the end, not that they realized it because this was still an important part of the water supply for the town. But then by the 60s, when we've pretty much bought a lot of the land in the watershed. There's talk about turning it into a municipal golf course or an industrial park. So those are the threats that we were, concerned about because as we got more reliant on the Southwick well fields, and in 2011 built a larger water line, which basically could supply the whole town from Southwick. That the environmental committee, the important partnership in this citizens group that's concerned about the environment, helped us get Audubon involved, and Audubon did a study, their extension service in 2015, and then out of that grew the idea that we should find some way to protect it more permanently. And we sold the restriction in 2021. Bob? Have I lost you guys?
Let's see. So
I think
yeah.
I'm sorry, I was on mute.
That's okay. That's all right. I thought it was you too. Go ahead.
Yes, sorry about that. So I was talking away, but nobody heard me. I apologize. So you heard a little bit about why all three of the partners thought the project and the property was so important, and something about the rich history, which Mark just went over. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about, how do we make it happen? What was our path to conservation? You can advance the slide. Thanks. So these are some scenes that you might see here today, but as Mark pointed out, the property right now is no longer used for what it was purchased for, which it makes it vulnerable to conversion. The reservoir went offline in 2011, and following that, right now the partners agreed, and this, the study and the town and sort of all things converged to make the partners think that the time is right. We need to start working to protect this forever. One of the questions we asked ourselves, and others asked us, is, isn't the property already protected? Because it's protected by Article 97. It's water supply land. That's what it was purchased for. Isn't it already protected? And we agreed that, in fact, the protection was not good enough. It was not solidified and permanent. Could you go to the next slide, please, Bob? So I'm just going to take a minute to talk a little bit about Article 97. I think most of us in this group understand and know about Article 97, but I'm just going to take a minute to go over a little bit. So I think we all understand that Article 97 and Article 97 protections come from the Massachusetts State Constitution. And back in 1972, the Massachusetts voters approved Article 97, which granted the people of Massachusetts the right basically to a clean environment, and listed a number of different uses that make up what a clean environment is. And it authorized the Commonwealth to buy land for those purposes, for Article 97 purposes. And so land acquired by the state or municipalities are protected under Article 97 for conservation and Article 97 purchases. And it's interesting to think, I think it was put into place, excuse me, as basically as a legislative check to make sure that the land that was acquired under this provision for conservation purposes weren't converted to other inconsistent uses. But I think, as we all know, it's not ironclad. It adds a great extra level of protection, which I think is pretty unique to our state. But it's not ironclad and can be overturned, or land can be converted with a 2/3 vote of the legislature, which isn't easy, but we all know it happens and can happen depending on who's in what chair at the time. And so that was another reason why we thought the timing was really right, because the town was very interested in protecting it. Mass Audubon and DCR were sort of lining up, realizing how important the property was. And with the support of the community, the timing was right for us to move in the last few years. I guess the other thing I want to say, and one of the reasons what this map shows, is we did some research into the title, because even though it's not ironclad, we also wanted to learn, is all of it protected by Article 97? Because one of the things that I got asked, when DCR is looking at what is the most important property to put our funding toward, is it already protected in some way? So we did some research at the title, and we found, as you would expect, it wasn't very clear. So even the areas that were explicit in the deed, which are shown shaded in like the pinkish and orange area in the map, explicitly said that they were purchased by the town for water supply protection purposes. All the area that's shaded around it was not. And I don't know if you remember back to the map that I showed earlier, but all of the really sensitive, most of the really sensitive resources are on the northern part of the property, north of the Massachusetts Turnpike. And that land actually was the most vulnerable. And so the three partners got together and decided that placing a conservation restriction on this property was really the best option for permanent protection of the entire property in perpetuity. Next slide, please, Bob. So I just thought I'd take a minute and I'll breeze through this, because I think everyone is familiar with conservation restrictions, but we agreed that conservation restrictions were a great tool for a number of reasons. I think, as everyone knows, a CR is a legal agreement between the landowner, who in this case was the town, and qualified restriction holders, which in this case was DCR and Mass Audubon, to permanently protect the property, and it's a legal interest in the property. So unlike Article 97, a conservation restriction is a tailored legal interest in the property that's recorded at the Registry of Deeds and protects particular important conservation values of the property, which we outlined in the conservation restriction. I think an important issue here was, as all CRs do, a conservation restriction allows the landowner to continue to own and manage the property, which was really important to the town. And it was, the town did not want to sell, and DCR and Mass Audubon particularly didn't want to own the property. And so it was really important. So that we came up with CR was the best tool to protect the property. This CR, Mass Audubon and DCR, as we've said before, actually co-hold the conservation restriction, which is, I think is a really excellent model. We've done it before in other parts of the state. We feel, the DCR and Mass Audubon really feel that, we're stronger together, and that, in this case and in many cases, it gives us a broader base of support and additional credibility, because both organizations working together bring different things to the table. We have different strengths and bring different resources to the table. Working together also helped us leverage funding, which was needed for the project, and it enabled us to pool staff for the protection, but also to monitor the property over time, which is, as you all know, really key to making sure that a conservation restriction is effective. So I just want to take 1 second to go back to the Article 97 issue and just point out that, so we figured out that we know Article 97 isn't ironclad, that this property in particular wasn't clearly entirely protected by Article 97. And we decided that we wanted to acquire a CR. But I also wanted to point out that in order for the town to convey a conservation restriction to us, we needed to get special legislation that needed to pass by 2/3 vote of the legislature because of Article 97. So even if the uses aren't changing, even if there's no conversion, conveying an interest out also requires legislation. And I think the reason I bring that up is it's important in terms of timing on conservation deals, both in terms of acknowledging that it takes time to pass a bill. And so you need to build in extra time, but also in the sequencing of a project. And I think, when you're doing a complicated land transaction and there are a lot of different partners acquiring a lot of different interests, you just need to take a moment and think about the order in which you do it so that you don't get stuck and then inadvertently put a conservation restriction on a property that, then you need to, if you need to then transfer another interest, you would need to get legislation. So I just wanted to mention that because it is an avenue to convert Article 97 land, but it's also an essential component of conserving or further and permanently protecting Article 97 land.
Jennifer, if I could jump in with one comment. So
Please.
as you know, I think this section that you've just covered might be the most important part of the presentation because it's really talking about how one provides permanent protection. And Article 97, as Jennifer described so well, when we really analyzed the property, we realized that it was a bit of a Swiss cheese situation, with some of it being encumbered with the covenants of Article 97, but certainly not all of it. And then the idea of a CR that would overlay everything, just as a, the analogy of belt and suspenders. If Article 97 is the belt and the CR is the suspenders in this case. And also the fact that the CR is co-held by two statewide entities, but importantly, one of them being public, the other being private. That insulates the CR part of it from political intrusion or one of those entities sort of becoming less committed to having that be in place in perpetuity. So it really was the right tool for this situation, as Jennifer described.
Thanks, Bob. Those were great additions, and as usual, I really agree with all of them. Yeah, the partnership. I think partnerships throughout this, both the partnerships between Mass Audubon and DCR and the town, were really critical and one of the key factors, which we'll talk about a little bit later, to enabling us to do this. And again, we all talk about like public-private partnerships and state and nonprofit and municipal, and really this really includes all of those factors. So now we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and lessons learned, and I'm just going to continue for a little bit and then turn it over to Bob and Mark. Next slide, please, Bob.
Yep.
So one of the things, just to keep going on the CR itself, one of the challenges and also lessons learned was around the terms of the conservation restriction. We needed to spend a lot of time figuring out and balancing terms of the CR that protected all these important resources, but also accommodated the future uses that the town wanted to perhaps do. One of which might be water supply, but really looking closer at like how the town was going to manage the property. And that took a lot of time. But it was worth the time to really work with the city councilors and folks from the town to really explain what a conservation restriction does and what the different terms. I gotta say, out of all the conservation restrictions I've ever acquired, I don't think we've ever gone through every single term as extensively as we did on this, but it paid off because we ended up in a place where, when we got the vote from the council, I think it was unanimous or almost unanimous.
Not totally.
What was that, Mark?
Close, not totally.
Right. I think there was
even those that were against us actually were stepping aside to let us.
Right. And I think it was really worth the time. And I guess, you know, the one thing that sort of kept me going through this, kept us going, I think, was one of the reasons that it was so difficult for some of the people to get on board was because they loved Bear Hole. And I think that really we just needed to educate them and work with them and, you know, gain trust and also really explain that a conservation restriction was really in the best interest of the long-term protection of Bear Hole, which is what most of the people really wanted. And so that was a lesson that at least I learned. I think we all learned it. Excuse me. Another, I think, interesting component of this is a management plan, which is wrapped into the conservation restriction, which Mark is currently working on. But we felt it was really important to include a management plan in this because for a couple of reasons. One is to really ensure the sound management and stewardship of the property over time and set that out at first and really bring all of the resources that the partners that were working on this now had to bear on the property so that we can get that in place now. But it also really helped convince the town that they were going to have management control, that they were going to be the managers of the property, and that by conveying a conservation restriction, they were not giving up control of the property, provided that the management was consistent with the terms of the CR. So that was an interesting process, and also and it's ongoing because the management plan is being completed. But I also think it's an important tool when you're looking at heavily used properties, you know, public properties. So a property owned by the town and it's really big and the town might want to do a number of things. So from the CR stewardship perspective, the management plan is helpful so that for all the partners, because the town doesn't need to come to DCR and Mass Audubon every time it wants to do something. You know, we all agree on a management plan up front, and then if it's in the approved management plan, the town can just proceed and do those things without having to get permission for a lot of things. So it makes both CR stewardship and management of property more streamlined. Next slide, please. And then the last thing I mentioned is, again, conservation restriction stewardship and monitoring over time on such a large and heavily used property is definitely going to be a challenge, but we really feel that we're stronger together. And you know, I'm grateful for the partnership. I think we're all grateful for the partnership that we have. But I think one point is that, you know, we all need to be vigilant. And I think all of us in our conservation work, because a lot of the times, particularly those of us that are involved in the transaction end, you know, put a conservation restriction on and you move on. But you really need to be vigilant because the land doesn't protect itself over time just because there's this conservation restriction on it. So in this case, we really have a three-way partnership with the town managing the property and DCR and Mass Audubon monitoring and enforcing the restriction to work together to make sure that the resources that we all agreed were really important to protect really continue to be protected and thrive over time.
And let me just throw in for supporting what Jennifer's saying about the management plan. In writing it, I'm finding that it's actually really good at helping us to focus on, well, what are the values and what do we want to do within the confines of the restriction. And it doesn't make the restriction being put in place the end, it makes it the beginning. And realizing that you have a long-term stewardship need for the property. So that's what I'm finding, and how to create new partnerships as we go forward on that as well.
So the Bear Hole, I think in part because of proximity to so many people, had some challenges from some of the public uses that were taking place on the property. And so when I first, I'll speak for myself, when I first got introduced to this property, I realized right away that there was a significant issue with all-terrain vehicles that were really causing some fairly significant degradation of the property in certain areas, and that certainly included erosion and ponding within the woods roads. And and so in working with Mark and others, the suggestion was to consider for West Springfield to consider hiring Mass Audubon's Ecological Extension Service, which is a part of the organization that can provide conservation expertise for a fee for those who need it. And this seemed to be a perfect instance for that. And so Mark did a great job lining up a grant for West Springfield, and that was used to hire Ecological Extension Service, or EES as we refer to it. And Jeff Collins and Bill Giesentanner and I, with the two of them doing most of the work, I really was peripherally involved. I want to make sure I give credit where credit is due. Did a very extensive study of the property. And one of the things that they found, for instance, is that there were too many access points. And with so many access points, not all of them could be observed on a regular basis. And so you'd have people going in for activities like the ATVs that were doing so much damage and other things at night. And it was kind of a scary place. And a lot of people stayed away from it because of stories of crazy things that were going on in there. And so one of the clear recommendations in this study for West Springfield was to reduce the number of access points. And we were really, really pleased to see over the years that passed how West Springfield took the recommendations in that report very, very seriously. And here's a good example of it here. The local police force having a mountain bike patrol to have more presence in there. As the mayor, who was one of the key players in this, the mayor Will Reichelt, terrific guy, by the way. I think the quote that I remember him saying is that what he wanted was lots of good people doing good things in Bear Hall, and that would really change the history of some of the not so good things that had been happening there for a very long time. And so things like this mountain bike police patrol was a key part of that approach.
If I can just jump in and before we move on, is I just want to say the work that the town did was incredibly effective, because the first time I walked Bear Hole, it was probably in 2009 or 10, I think, maybe. And I guess, just as Bob said, the ATV damage was incredible, and it was very pervasive in a lot of the areas. And then when we went back out, I think probably in 2018 or 19, when we started working on it again, it was an incredible difference. And that improved stewardship was really key to getting DCR buy-in, because back when we first looked at it, we were really reluctant, because even if it was conservation restriction, we were thinking this is going to be a monitoring nightmare. And what are we going to do? And the town, we can't, what's the town going to do? Because really the town needed to take control. And so I just wanted to add that improvement that the town made on so many fronts really was another key thing that enabled us to participate.
And so now we'll hand to Mark to talk about survey encroachments and title issues.
So as you can imagine, it's a large property. It's about 3.5 miles long and a mile wide. And in trying to do such a complicated project, that we acquired properties from 1906 all the way up to the 1980s, was part of the problem. So, we'd buy it or we get a tax title, and we wouldn't necessarily say, well, this is for water supply or what. We hear you guys in this department take care of it. So it all becomes bare hole. And when the title report was done, it was 437 pages long, contained about 35 major title parcels, of which there were about 500 subparcels. And what created some of those subparcels was something that was unique, but not unique to just our area. There were a couple big parcels that were divided up into about 1,700 square foot lots called Oat Nuts in Mountain View. And Oat Nuts was, I think the next slide has, that had this free giveaway. If you bought 3 breakfast cereal box tops and you bought 2 of theirs, you could, for $2 in 1902, have a deed drafted and recorded. Our Mountain View site, that one, they recorded most of the deeds on the same day. They filed the plat first and did the deeds. Some of those deeds weren't filed until later, and some of those deeds were never recorded. So that created such title issues, and we had to do a title action. So these all add to the complexity and the length of time in terms of trying to do. You know, it's not just a simple, oh, we're going to worry about DCS taking time to review the CR. It's all these other complicated things that, you know, made it harder and lengthened our time for doing the project. So just on our baseline alone, the survey cost probably over $100,000, and we ended up having to split that 3 ways. And our baseline report is about 495 pages long and has about 500 photographs. So it's the perimeter is long, and it, as alluded to by Jen and Bob, is that, you know, with the ATV use and the porosity of the perimeter, it's a fight that we still are challenged with, but we did make some significant gains in trying to limit access. So in this process, we also found about 9 encroachments, including there's photos here of a shed that's on, you know, people just think, well, hey, it's public land, I can do what I want, I can dump here, so we get a lot of that. But we did have a shed. This is clearly onto our property. Hey, you know, who cares where the property line is? It's all public land. And then we had a tree house that was built and has since been torn down. And then, as you know, because this is a trap rock from the volcanic historic period, we have a quarry that shares part of our common boundary, and they had encroached into our property. There were some changes because there were sales between us where they took more land, but then, so it actually, in hindsight, it was bad having them encroach on us, but now that the CR is in place, it was tough getting there, and they were kind of pains in the ass in that process. But now that they know that it's there, it's created a better sense of relationship with them, and a partnership that we probably wouldn't have been able to, or a friendship or with them if we hadn't done this. They would have probably just kept taking our land and asking this town to sell it to them. So anyway, so that's the story on encroachments.
And Mark, if I could just jump in on that one. So I'll go back to this slide of the shed, which is over the line onto the Bear Hole property. Given that Mass Audubon and DCR were co-holding a CR on the property, the existence of these encroachments essentially amounted to a violation on day one if they were not addressed. And really just want to express some appreciation to the town for taking that issue really seriously and working diligently to resolve these encroachments. And so, you know, certainly Mark, and while I'm thinking of it, I also want to credit Mark, because the
Okay.
the voluminous title research that was needed on this. There really needed to be a person who was willing to dig into the records that were down in dusty basement and to really figure things out. And that was Mark. And I hope you don't have a dust allergy, Mark, because otherwise
Oh,
that
no, it took me 11 years, so I guess maybe it did.
but that was key. So these encroachments were resolved prior to the CR going on. And so we were able to take ownership of the CR, co-holding it without having those exist as encroachments.
Yeah, I just
Go ahead,
want to
Jennifer.
add, it was amazing that, well, a couple things. One is, I think there were 9 encroachments.
Yeah, I think there are 9.
Which on the one hand was a pain, but on the other hand was amazing, I thought, amazingly few for the number of miles of boundary that this property has. And then the cooperation between Mark and the mayor and the town council to like reach out to the landowners and get almost all of them to move back was pretty incredible. And I just want to say that this taught us a lesson, and we are now doing that. That's our model now with CRs, is really taking a very close look at boundaries before we acquire the CRs, and trying to either get the landowner to get their neighbors to move off, or depending, like certain things, if it's, unfortunately sometimes people will build a home, like a home. They're not going to move their home. We've started to actually exclude little tiny corners if it doesn't negatively impact the values of the CR, exclude them from the conservation restriction, not to reward bad behavior, but to just make sure that we're not going to be sort of on the landowner's case annually when we monitor it, because as Bob said, basically you'd be acquiring a violation on day one. And so I think this was a really great model, and the town was incredibly effective in resolving the encroachments, which, I just don't know if we'll have that kind of luck or fortune in other locations, but I'm very pleased that we had it here.
So one of the interesting aspects of this project was getting to yes, essentially. And I approached 3 successive mayors of West Springfield to try to find the moment that was right to finally conserve this property. And with the current mayor, Will Reichelt, that was the right person. And we saw that the stars were beginning to align. And everything in the first segments of this project just went incredibly smoothly, smooth sailing, that is. And some would say it was actually a love fest. It was, it really was. This whole thing was just cruising right along. Everybody just said, this is great. This is going to be fantastic. And because of that, we kind of knew that there might be a bump in the road at some point in the future. And sure enough, there was. And that was when we got to the point of approaching the council, the city council, to we needed their approval. And there was some politics in the room with us, and different worldviews, and sort of a little microcosm of our entire country, actually, to be very frank. And before he knew it, what had been looking like it was just going to go through on greased rails suddenly was completely stuck. And we actually got turned down. We got a negative vote at one point. As Jennifer alluded to, one of the things that we did to rebound from getting a negative vote and to break this impasse was to really go through the terms of the CR in incredible detail. with a working group that was established as part of the city council process. And that did lead to a better CR. It also led to a lot of education of the folks that were involved, especially those who had concerns or reservations. And eventually they saw that this was in the best interest of this place that they loved too, Bear Hole. And so we did get our approvals on it. So in terms of key ingredients to success, the first one's the obvious one. The property was just incredibly significant from so many perspectives. You know, it had a history angle, it had biodiversity, it had landscape scale, it had climate response, it had human health benefits, so many important aspects of it. So that was really key. And then let's see, is that Mark or Jennifer? I've forgotten on the second.
Which one? The partnership one?
Yes.
That's me. So,
Great.
and actually, that point is definitely ripe again today. I met yesterday with Westfield State as I'm working on the management plan. The partnership aspect of this, having DCR, having Audubon, it's very useful. I think back to the days at Garrett, I know you're on this call, where we go to Hitchcock Center and hear about all the different things that the state's doing in different parts of the western part of the Commonwealth. And I was like, wow, well, there's a lot that you could do down here. And having those partners involved and focused on us is a good thing. And so I met with students, faculty of Westfield State yesterday in an effort to try to use this as a classroom, a learning area to help inform the CR. The restriction requires us to manage a natural area to be managed, but we need to know what those resources are. And so one of the things is to try to do something like a Harvard Forest classroom experience with the Westfield State students. So partnerships are the key to this, making this happen. And clearly, you know, just going to the city council and trying to explain this alone would have been hard, but having people that have done this before, having people that are bring a lot of credibility to the table certainly makes it a lot easier. Bob.
And there was the Jennifer, I think that's you, isn't it?
Yeah, I was.
Oh, Jennifer, sorry.
I'll just jump in here and just add to that. I think I agree with you, Mark. Partnerships, and just one more thing about partnerships is it really helped us leverage funding, which was needed. And I'm not sure that either of the organizations could have come up with the funding we needed on our own. And so again, just another opportunity for working together. Local support and involvement. I mean, I think we've said this throughout. We couldn't have done this without the support of the town, and particularly, you know, Mark was really key over all the years from the very beginning, just waving the flag and keeping at it. And then, you know, as Bob said, the mayor and the mayor's staff, the town council. I mean, just the local support, and it turned out that in the end, most of the city council as well. So just having the local support, and then the people of West Springfield support coming out to meetings. And then I also want to mention, I don't know if the environmental committee's come up yet in our talk today, but they shouldn't be forgotten, because the environmental committee in West Springfield is also, you know, they've also been waving the flag since day one on this. And they were really helpful in the process that we were involved in over the last couple of years. At one of the meetings we had, I think, you know, Al Cabot, I don't know if he's the chair anymore, but they printed stickers and were there handing stuff out. But really to have, you know, an environmental committee and both the town people's support and the town government support was really the only way this whole thing would have happened.
The environmental committee is one of the reasons why you have so many certified vernal pools in the north. They did all that work.
Mm-hmm. And then the last one is the obvious one, timing. And, you know, we were all, the three of us were in our entities that we're affiliated with were drawn together, sensing that this was the time. This was the time to put the permanent protections in place, that as time went on with the property not being fully protected, eventually something unfortunate would happen. The appraised value of Bear Hole, I can't even imagine what that number would be. It would blow your mind what that number would be. And so we were able to work through the political challenges and get this done with a lot of leadership from some very, very important people, certainly including the mayor. So with that, there's our partners here on one of the tours, site visits of the property. And then just for a little fun, one day I was looking at this map here, and I was looking at Bear Hole and in green there, and I said, whoa, wait a second, what do I see there? I see a witch on a broom is what I see. And thanks, Garrett. I appreciate the chuckle. So that's the presentation. I think we have a couple minutes anyway for any questions or comments that anyone might have.
Yeah, and it's such a small group, but you don't need to put anything in the chat. You can just, if anyone has any questions, you can just ask them.
I'm curious, like Bob and Jennifer, when did you become aware of the property? Did it jump out on the map? Did Mark start bugging you, or what raised your attention level?
That's a great question. My memory is that it was Mark.
Actually, it was the environmental committee. So it was a grassroots effort. I came over in 2009, and as Jen said, we started talking about this about then. So it goes, and the reason that like the environmental committee was concerned even before then, before 2009, and they came to me, and I was working in Windy River, and I said, "Oh, go certify a bunch of vernal pools," and they went and certified all the vernal pools. So having that kind of involvement is good.
Yeah.
So it's just an ad hoc citizens?
Yeah, they don't really even have they're not a formal organization. They actually were afraid to form a 501c3 early on to being like attacked, I think. And so they informally get together, and they formed around one of our parks, the up until, well, the biggest park, actually, the formal park is Mitnick Park. And that was going to be a golf course. The town made a move back in the 80s to turn it into part of it into a municipal golf course. And that group formed or coalesced against that. And then they kept doing other things. They advocated for recycling and then Bear Hole, of course.
It was kind of like a game of telephone, right? So it was the environmental committee and Mark, and then back in 2009, Mass Audubon and DCR folks from both. I remember you saw in the picture that the one person I didn't mention I want to is Jen Soper, who worked with me on the project from DCR and was really played a key role in this project as well, especially with regard to the survey. But in any event, I remember we went out and walked it back in 2009, and then for us, it just didn't happen for a number of different reasons. But then it was on our radar screen, and so it was just always on our radar screen. Every once in a while, we reach out to Mark, and then a few years ago, I think Bob, guess Mass Audubon re-engaged in a more direct way, and Bob reached out to me, and then we jumped back in.
I want to make sure to mention Kate Butolf, the land protection specialist for Mass Audubon at that time in Western Mass. Markel Smith is on the call here. She's a new second land protection specialist for Western Mass, but Kate really, really did yeoman's work on this project. She just did amazing work on this project. And so it's really important to mention her.
And then the other thing that was really interesting is that the financial value of this property you mentioned, was there kind of no negative force raising that potential financial windfall to the town, as opposed to your positive force saying, let's protect this?
There certainly was a sentiment among some to keep the options open.
Exactly. That's it.
And that was exactly what we did not want to do, because as I said, eventually there would be that circumstance, a friend of the mayor who has $1 bazillion and suggests something during a downturn in the economy where the schools are struggling, and we've all seen those scenarios. And that's what we were worried about, is that eventually that could happen. We also, I'll just say, we chose the figure of $1 million, which is what we paid the town to do this CR. We paid for the CR. We felt that 7 figures, it had to be 7 figures to get people's attention. It had to be, to be perceived as significant. Especially in light of what you're raising, the actual, ultimate value if they just sold it. And I think that was the right number, in retrospect.
Yeah, the appraisal, presented that sort of like, oh my God, it's worth a lot more. But there were, as Jen said, there were some protections from Article 97. So it wasn't that it had true market value for some of it.
Yeah.
And that, but the underlying kind of text was, there were people that were saying, well, we don't want to do this. And you could read the tea leaves that they were really saying, oh, we can sell this for something else.
Yeah. And how did you come up with $1 million?
I'll speak for Mass Audubon. So we committed to raising $300,000 of that $1 million. We also raised another $50,000 to be transferred to the town for long-term care and control. Really, almost anything that the town wants to spend it on at Bear Hole. And I was very encouraged to see the response from our supporters statewide. People recognized how important this was. Jennifer, did you want to talk about
Yeah,
this?
just, as being, ranking as a high priority, I was able to get the support to, for DCR to put in the rest of those funds out of our capital budget.
Pretty good.
Mark held, oh, sorry. I don't know if you had a follow-up, but I think Markel also was trying to say something.
Yeah,
Is that right?
Thanks. I just wanted to thank you all. That was such it's so great to hear a story like that from start to finish, and how you managed it so successfully with so many partners. It's very inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I guess I just have like a timeline question, thinking about Article 97 specifically and how long that portion of the project took. And then it sounds like the project in its entirety took, is it 11 years?
Yeah, but I would say, what do you guys think, Mark, about? I would say for us, I feel like it took 2 years of focused effort, working like the last push where we were actively working with the town and drafting the CR and doing the work, all the due diligence work. I would say 2 years. I would also say that the Article 97 part, having dealt with Article 97 for years and years, it almost felt like rocket speed. So like once we got, the bill was fairly simple, we had examples of those, but once we got the endorsement of the town, we filed the bill, and we didn't file the bill. I should say that the town worked with their legislative delegation to file the bill. And once the bill was filed, it passed, if I'm remembering correctly, within like 6 months. And a lot of that was due to the support of the local legislators and also Mass Audubon you know, their advocacy department working to help get it passed. But that was just really, really, I mean, both really incredible, but also a little bit scary and enlightening in that that's how fast a bill could get passed. You know, if it were, you know, we were doing it for the purposes, the conservation purposes, but that's how quickly a bill could get passed to convert property as well. So.
Wow. And do you feel like that's because like it had local legislators supporting, backing it, that it could move so quickly? Like, is that key for getting Article 96, like, you know, to not to change a use, because obviously this was still, you know, it was an extra layer of protection, but, you know, is that key to the Article 97 process, is that local support?
I think so. I mean, we had our legislative delegation pushing it, so that was good. You know, oftentimes they'll take these up at the end of session, and you won't, you know, and if nobody's the mother or father of it, then it kind of gets swept over if it can, or gets refiled. One thing I would say about the Article 97 conversation that was helpful to us, I have now a town council, our town attorney, who's very understands it a lot better. And we had a situation come up and she said, oh, that will affect our funding and we need to do this right. And yet our legislative delegation still thinks it's, you know, so Article 97 as a concept is good, but it doesn't always, you know, some people interpret it as, oh, well, that's, we'll just get rid, you know, it's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
I also have to say, I think having the local delegation is key, and having an advocate also in Mass Audubon was also key. It's just really, I think it's really important to have, you know, inside and outside support.
I agree.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll just say that I've heard bear hole every 3 or 4 years, mostly from Mark. And I've never quite known where it was.
Oh, come for a walk.
So it's really cool to see parts of it and to know that it's there and it's protected.
It's actually led to, so we're doing another project with Audubon with Kate right now, where we've bought another 70, maybe 100 acres to sort of add a buffer to Bear Hole even.
Yeah.
And I was out on the property last night and it was fabulous.
One of my favorite memories was as we were getting close to protecting the property, I arranged a site visit with some of the Mass Audubon staff who had not been to the property. And one of them was an intern from the Boston area, very, very urban experience, and really hadn't gone out to rural parts of Massachusetts, and really had never seen anything like Bear Hole. And we drove out there, you know, a couple-hour drive, got out, put the maps out on the hood of the car, and he turns around and what does he see but a bobcat crossing the road. And that was one of the coolest experiences, was watching his face. And he was just amazed. He was speechless. He just stood there stunned that we had just seen this creature. And it really drove home for all of us how important and special Bear Hole was.
Yeah, I know Terry Blunt used to talk about having a service that would plant endangered species. But certainly having the charismatic megafauna rental service would be great.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think Terry had a corner on the bald eagle market, because anytime you take anyone out for a tour, there'd always be a bald eagle flying over somewhere on the river. I don't know how he did it, but God bless him.
Yeah, I remember Terry saying things like, you know, this eastern box turtle scurried across the road, and you could hardly see the wires sticking out from the bottom.
Wow. Anyone else? Anything? We should go hiking there. That's my final thought.
We'll plan the next one there.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I think we are coming a few minutes over time. I'm sure that's okay. But yeah, no, thank you everyone who attended. And thank you to all our presenters. This is a very interesting talk. I know I'm excited to go explore Bear Hole while I'm still in Western Mass. So now I have another thing on my bucket list before I graduate.